Sega Channel. It's available now, and your cable company has it. It's the first interactive network providing video games on demand 24 hours a day. With Sega Channel, you play what you want, when you want, for as long as you want, for one low monthly price.
Remember the 90s? Blowing into Sega Genesis cartridges, swapping games with friends, and begging your parents for just one more blockbuster rental. Now imagine a world back then where you could play dozens of games without buying or renting a single cartridge, an on-demand library beamed straight to your console. Sounds like an early Game Pass, right? Believe it or not, Sega Channel made that a reality back in 1994. Before Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Plus, this retro gaming tech was basically digital game streaming in the 90s, delivered through your cable TV. Hard to believe? Stick around, because the story of Sega Channel is one of the most underrated Sega innovations ever, and it's a nostalgic ride you don't want to miss. So what exactly was Sega Channel? In short, it was a bold online game service for the Sega Genesis, also known as the Mega Drive, that launched in late 1994. Instead of tuning to a TV show, subscribers would tune their cable line into a special Sega Channel adapter, turning their console into a gateway for on-demand games. The service officially launched on December 14th, 1994, a partnership between Sega and cable providers like TCI and Time Warner. And it immediately gave Genesis owners access to a rotating library of titles, up to 50 games a month, downloadable directly through their cable TV. Sega's goal was revolutionary: deliver video games 24/7 on demand. No store trips, no extra hardware beyond the adapter. Essentially, it was Netflix for Sega games long before Netflix or cloud gaming even existed. Players could even download game demos, access cheat codes, and read gaming news through the service. Sega Channel's history might be a footnote today, but at the time it felt like stepping into the future of gaming. Let's rewind to the early 90s. Sega was riding high on the Genesis and looking for the next big thing to one-up Nintendo.
Genesis does
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does
16-bit sports action.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis does.
Get Joe Montana free, Pat Riley free, Buster Douglas free, Super Monaco GP free, or Columns free.
Genesis does.
What Nintendo don't.
Buy a 16-bit Genesis system between now and October 31st and get an extra game.
Their idea? Use cable television to deliver games on demand. Announced in 1993, the Sega Channel project was developed by Sega of America in a joint venture with Telecommunications Incorporated and Time Warner Cable. After some trials and technical hurdles, the service officially rolled out in the United States in December 1994. The launch was even hyped with a big promotional event in Pittsburgh featuring NHL star Mario Lemieux talk about a headline grabber for the era. From day one, Sega Channel charged a monthly subscription fee of around $12.95, plus a one-time activation fee. In return, players got unlimited access to a selection of 50 or so games that changed every single month. Don't just watch TV, play TV, Sega advertised. Get hooked into this 24-hour game channel. It was a tantalizing offer, unlimited gaming without buying new cartridges, at a time when a single Genesis game cost about $60 in stores. No wonder a 1995 Sports Illustrated for Kids survey found that kids were 5 times more likely to want Sega Channel over a brand new game console. Sega Channel was poised to be a hit, at least on paper. So how did Sega pull off this games over cable magic? It all started with a special adapter, a black box that plugged into the Genesis cartridge slot and connected to the cable line through a coaxial cable. If you were a subscriber, your cable company would transmit game data over a dedicated channel, and the adapter would decode that signal. Think of it like tuning into a TV channel, except the show was a stream of video game data. The adapter had memory, temporary RAM, to store the downloaded games. When you powered on your Genesis, a colorful on-screen menu would load, sometimes after a few seconds of static. Using your controller, you could scroll through categories like action, sports, puzzles, and more, plus sections for demos and news. Pick a game, hit play, and the adapter would download the data into memory via the cable signal. After a brief load, the game would launch like you had the cartridge plugged in. It felt like sorcery in 1995. Because the games lived in temporary memory, any progress or high scores would vanish when you turned off the system, a drawback for fans of long RPGs. The service was one way. Your Genesis only received data, so there was no live multiplayer or uploading anything back. Games were broadcast in a continuous loop by the cable provider. If the game you wanted wasn't immediately available, the adapter had to wait and grab it the next time it cycled through the stream. Load times range from almost instant to maybe a minute or two. Not bad at all when you remember this was long before broadband or even home internet for most people. What Sega pulled off here was basically turning the Genesis into a primitive broadband console. What was it like to actually use Sega Channel? Imagine coming home from school in 1995 and powering on your Genesis. You're greeted by a funky 16-bit menu theme with bright, cartoonish icons. Maybe it's December and the menus are decked out in pixel snowflakes. You scroll over to Arcade, pick a title like Sonic Spinball, hit play, and watch the progress bar fill as the game downloads. Suddenly, you're in, no cartridge, no trip to the store, it just worked. And the lineup was surprisingly fresh. About 1/3 of the games rotated each month, giving players reasons to come back and check out what was new. There were hits, cult classics, and even imports. But here's where Sega Channel really flexed exclusive content. We're talking demos of upcoming games, time-limited trials, and sneak previews that you couldn't get anywhere else. It was like having early access before anyone even used that phrase. And Sega Channel also offered games that weren't available in cartridge form in the US. For example, Mega Man, The Wily Wars, a 16-bit remake of the first 3 Mega Man games, never got a physical release in North America. It was Sega Channel exclusive. Other rare finds included Alien Soldier, Pulseman, and Golden Axe 3, Japanese games that never officially came west. And there were even one-offs like Klondike, or special versions of games you couldn't play anywhere else. If you were a collector or just loved discovering obscure titles, Sega Channel was a treasure chest. Of course, not everything was perfect. Sega Channel had challenges and quite a few of them. First, the cost. $13 a month plus your regular cable bill was steep for families in the mid-90s, especially considering that the Genesis was already on its way out. That's right, Sega Channel launched 3 years into the Genesis's life cycle and kept going well into the Saturn era. By the time it dropped in late 1994, new consoles like the Sony PlayStation were already making waves. Critics pointed out that it was asking people to invest in a dying console, and they weren't wrong. Accessibility was another big issue. Not every cable provider supported Sega Channel, and even those that did rolled it out slowly. If you lived in the wrong area or had a regional cable company, you were out of luck. And setting it up wasn't exactly plug and play. You needed to contact your cable company, get the adapter, install it, and hope your Genesis setup didn't clash with accessories like the Sega CD or the 32X. In some cases, the adapter wouldn't even fit unless you took everything apart. Compatibility issues were so widespread that Sega engineers had an entire lab with dozens of different cable boxes to test and troubleshoot. On top of that, the analog cable signal was not always reliable. Interference, signal noise, or a bad coax line could corrupt a download. If the game didn't load properly, you had to reset the system and try again. It wasn't a deal breaker for most users, but it definitely tested your patience. And remember, since everything was stored in RAM, turning off your Genesis wiped the memory. There were no cloud saves or persistent data. If you were playing something like Phantasy Star, you had to use passwords or keep the console powered on. There were also fears from retailers. If kids could get games at home, would they stop buying cartridges? Some stores even stopped stocking Genesis games in protest. And while Sega tried to position the service as a companion, not a replacement, the tension was real. On top of that, Sega Channel never hit the numbers Sega hoped for. At its peak, it had about 250,000 subscribers. Sega wanted 1 million. But interest faded as new consoles came out. By 1997, That number dropped to around 230,000. In July of 1998, Sega Channel quietly shut down. But here's the thing. Even though it wasn't a commercial success, Sega Channel left a massive legacy. It proved that players would pay a flat fee for access to a big rotating game library. Sound familiar? It was the ancestor to services like Xbox Live Arcade, PlayStation Network, and modern platforms like Game Pass. The whole idea of downloadable demos, time-limited trials, and on-demand access to games, Sega did it first. Gamers who had Sega Channel remember it fondly. It wasn't just about the tech, it was about the experience, the excitement of scrolling through a new menu every month, the thrill of finding a game you'd never heard of, the bragging rights of trying out a title before your friends, and even the frustration of waiting for a download added to the memory. Sega Channel felt ahead of its time, because it was. In the end, Sega Channel was a brilliant idea trapped in the wrong era. It needed broadband, not analog cable. It needed the Genesis's peak, not its decline. But it set the stage for everything we take for granted today. Instant downloads, subscription services, early access previews. So next time you fire up Game Pass or grab a PlayStation Plus demo, just remember, some kid in 1995 was doing the same thing, through a cable line and a black adapter on a Sega Genesis. And for a moment, the future was right there in their living room. Thanks for watching, and if you had Sega Channel, drop your favorite memory in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the hidden gems of gaming history.